All right, let's do this thing. Howdy, folks. This is Chris White, and you're listening to Basic Business Advice. This is our second in a series of interviews that we're doing. We've got our crew here from our last interview, Jordan Stoltzfoods, Ken Hostetler, and myself, Chris White, and also the president of Canal Dover and the president of Kingsway Paving, Nick Pickrel. Nick, we're really excited to have you here today. We're already laughing a lot before we got started here, so we're good to go. But Jordan, you're going to kick us off today, so go for it.
Yeah, so you've been around the community for a little while. Like, people know you kind of as like the furniture guy, now the asphalt guy.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit of a deep dive into your history, so I want to go way back, something people might not know. You were a seafood merchant.
Oh,
so
geez.
talking your LinkedIn profile, one of your first business listed here is Deep Creek Seafood.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, and if you're familiar with Deep Creek Lake, which is in Western Maryland, it does not have seafood in it, so don't go take out crab fish and get there. Basically, that spawned it out of, I had a lawn care business. I started when I was like 12, and when I was 15, it was one of my clients. I'd become friends with him, worked with him, and he's like, "Hey, I have this idea," and I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I got nothing else to do," and so we went together. We bought a freezer van. But I say freezer, like just a regular 15-passenger van that was converted to, with a freezer in it. And we would drive it down to Chesapeake Bay, Maryland, and pick up crabs and oysters and shrimp and bring it back. And we set up at the local fire department outside, and we would hawk seafood on the weekend. And I've never had a business just go so horrible most of the time. Like it was such a learning experience in what people in perishable food items go through to try and figure out, well, how much do I serve? Do I bring in? Because every single weekend we either brought in way too much or way too little.
Yeah.
And so by Sunday evening would come, and we're like trying to hawk off 10 bushels of crabs or something. Like, just please take them. I want to turn this van off. I don't want to run it anymore. And so that lasted for a whole summer.
Sounds fun.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the business partner I had, he ended up taking it, and he created a cabin or whatever it called it at Big Bear Lake, and now he brings seafood in. He does French fries and stuff on the weekends, and so he has an actual building.
He figured it out.
Yeah, he figured it out. I was like,
Nice.
this is not for me. I'm gonna go mow grass. So yeah, that was a fun learning experience.
Yeah, no doubt.
And it was interesting, and it's just a stamp in Nick's life of the different things that I've gotten into.
So,
Very
Nick,
cool.
the reality of it is I know your story, and I'd love to pick apart parts of it, but being an entrepreneur is like breathing to you.
It really is, and it's in my blood. My mom is an entrepreneur. She has high-end dogs and sells those, and started from one at the house. My grandfather, on the carpenter side, so my mom's side, my grandpa carpenter, he had multiple businesses throughout his career. He owned multiple Ford dealerships. They had a motel court. At one time, he had what was called the Country Boys, which was they took petting zoo animals through parades, and so he had like donkeys that pulled carts that had goats on them, that had dogs on them, and they called it the Country Boys. And it all started, and this is just his thinking, and it all started because he wanted to advertise for a gas station that he had off the interstate. But you couldn't advertise because the sign was too far from the entrance of the building. And so he's like, well, I'll buy the property here and then put the goats on that property and then put a sign up and say, stop here, the home of the Country Boys. And it would get people to stop and go to the gas station. And
That's brilliant.
yeah, so that's honestly where I get it. So I get it from my grandfather, and I spent a lot of time with him growing up. So I'd started my own lawn care service when I was 12. Just, taking over the accounts my brothers used to do, and I'd go push mow them. So I started off with my two neighbors, and then I bought a mower from the neighbor who I mowed his grass from, so he didn't need it anymore. So I paid like $75 for that, and then started anywhere I could drive with that mower, I'd go try to pick up lawns, and then ended up picking up two beside my grandparents, so he'd pick me up, go do those two. And it just kept snowballing. And then when I was probably 15, 16, I started hanging out with him on the weekends, and on the weekends during the weekdays, and we would go over business plans and projections and what's it take and do Excel sheets, And I mean, probably from 15 to 18, 19, 20, I mean, probably looked at 30, 40 different kinds of businesses. And we do projections. I remember going to West Virginia, and I'm like 16, and we walk into this mobile home or modular home manufacturing facility. And we go in there, and we're like talking about buying the place. Or what would that look like? Or setting up a dealership for them. I was like, I'm 16. What am I doing here? Like, I'm sitting in these meetings where I was like, what does this even mean? And so, yeah, we looked at all kinds of different businesses and stuff, and that's just what he did.
So you're talking about an absolutely normal teenage.
Yeah, very normal. Like,
Did you realize it was not normal, or did it take you till you're older? Like now you're looking back, obviously it wasn't, but then did it feel normal?
No, I realized it wasn't normal.
Okay.
You know, I would skip sporting events to work. I would skip our school would travel to different things. I skipped out on that in high school one year because I had to work. And when I say work, like I chose to. And, but it was just what I loved to do. I mean, I loved it from the beginning. I just knew that's what I was going to do. Whether it was business or entrepreneurship, whatever it is, like that's just what I love to do. And the scrap of it, the creativity of it, like I enjoy that. And,
that's awesome.
So yeah, and it ended up being about 2013 where the business we actually ended up starting together was Tri-State Trench and Bore. I don't know, really long name, but that just fell in our laps. So a company out of Florida came in, rented some property that my grandfather owned, and it had a shop on it, and they had the local Comcast contract, so they were doing the aerial and underground for Comcast. And they came from Florida, and that winter they were just stuck everywhere. And I was the only person they knew in the area. So they'd call me up and say, hey, can you come dig this trench? Can you come pull our guys out? It's 9 o'clock at night. We're stuck here and there. And so I did that all winter long. I'd go out and help these guys. And by spring came, and they're like, hey, why don't you just do the work for us? And we'll just get you. And I was like,
they're like, we don't want to be here anymore. You obviously do.
They're like, we'll do the aerial stuff, and you do the underground. And I was like, well, I don't even know what that means. What does that mean? And they're like, well, you buy this trencher cable plow thing, and we have one here. You can buy it for $5,000, and we'll pay you, I think it's $150 a drop. And a drop is basically from the street to the house. You bury the line. And we looked at it and was like, well, we should get about 5 a day done. That should make sense. So, all right, let's buy it. So we started the company. It was me and my grandfather started it. And first day we go out, and it's just me and him out in the middle of nowhere doing these things. We got like 2 done. And we're like, well, that's not going to work. and it just kind of kept escalating from there. And within a couple months, we had a directional drill. And again, something else we bought in the middle of, it was like an asset sale in DC, and we went down and picked this thing up, dropped it off at the dealership, and they're like, yeah, you don't have anything you need to do this. We're like, I don't know, what do you need? Like, we just bought it, and it was like 40 grand later and stuff and parts and service, and we're like, well, that's what we paid for the thing. And but my grandfather was always so supportive in the whole thing, and he was just like, he was always like, let's just figure it out. And so I just kind of picked up on that, and you know, he was there, and so I learned a lot through those years working with him, and then so that would have been, so we just started that in 2011. Sorry, so we started that in 2011, and then 2013 is when he passed away. You know, got killed in a 4-wheeler accident of all things at the age of, I think he was 74, 75. You know. Going too fast on a 4-wheeler wrecks it. Like, who goes out that way? It's
74.
like, well,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
he does. You know, that's how he does it. And so then it all kind of landed in my lap, and it was like, here you go. And the exact month before, we had just bought a directional drill, which for us, so I'd been 23 at the time. So we bought that drill, and I bought a house at the same time, and you know, didn't know what I was doing with any of it. And the next year was like probably the worst year in business I've ever had. You know, our sales just tanked, and I was carrying all this debt and this and that, and we were trying to grow, and it was a nightmare.
How old were you at this point?
So at this point, I was 23.
So you're still really young. You're in it.
Yeah, so I was 23 trying to figure out how to make this $5,000 a month drill payment on a drill that we used literally for 1 month before he passed away, and it was like, what in the world? And he was always the one, like, he handled the books, the finance, the taxes. He was a CPA, and so he handled all that stuff. And so I didn't really pay much attention to that. It was my grandfather, and he just took care of it. Mm-hmm. And I handled the operation side, and then I got thrown into that. And I'm not a accountant in any way, shape, or form. And here I am doing the books, trying to figure out payroll and this and that, and it was just a nightmare. And but we got through it. I had some amazing guys there that I always say they worked for me for free. They were just like, hey, we'll figure this out. And we got through it and did that business for another 3 years after that. Mm-hmm. And that's when it was starting to take off. We were paying off our debts. We were working our way up. Our name was starting to get out there. We just completed a pretty big project in Dulles, Virginia, working on the basically the train that goes from the plane or from the airport into DC there, and big project. And we just completed that, and then I had my first kid, and I just got married about 2 years before that, and pretty soon it was like, this isn't going to work. Mm. It's like, we're going to end up moving out to Ohio. And we talked about it and this and that. And at this time, my father-in-law had sat down with all the kids and said, hey, if you want to transition out of Canal, I want to transition out of Canal over. If anybody wants in, now's the time to get in. Like, you're going to have to run it for a couple of years before we do that. And this was about a year, so I was like, I got my own thing. I got my house. Mm-hmm. I got my business in Maryland. And it was just like, there was just something. It was like, I need to move to Ohio. And it was pretty rough for me. I remember going through for a whole month trying to work this out, like between me and God and personally and ego and everything else. And it's like, all right, you just getting going, you shut it down, you move to Ohio, what's everybody going to say, whatever it is. And then when you get out there, what in the world are you going to do? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not furniture. Like, I don't know what I'm doing with furniture. And but finally we decided we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And I think the best part was I literally just bought a brand new drill. So it was a bigger drill. We were going after bigger projects. We hadn't even used the thing yet. It hadn't even shown up yet. And I was like, all right, we're pivoted. We're selling everything. We're going to Ohio. And but before that, I tried to line up jobs for the guys that worked for me. Mm-hmm. That was probably the biggest thing, is where are they going to do, what are they going to do? Because we built this for 6 years, worked on it. So I tried to kind of get them jobs lined up, and then decided, brought them all in and say, hey, here's what's happening. Here's the direction I'm going. And the rest is history on that company. And out to Ohio we moved, and
not just anywhere in Ohio.
Not just anywhere in Ohio. To Holmes County, Ohio. And so.
Yeah, well, that actually leads me to my question. My first question, I guess, is what are the pros and cons of coming into a community like this? I mean, you're an outsider, but you have a little bit of an in with your wife's family. What was that like?
What's interesting is just, everything. I can look back on my life and just see where God's hand was at work in so many different things. In the summer of 2011, when we started the company, a friend of mine that went to our church, she was pushing me to go on a mission trip to Guatemala. And this will all tie in. And I just didn't want to go. Like I said, I was in business mode. That's what I knew I wanted to do. That's where I wanted to go. That's how I wanted to. And I was like, I'm going to be the sender. There's the goers and the senders, and I'm going to be a sender. And but finally she wore me down. I said, all right, I'll go. And about a week before this, or a couple weeks before we went on this trip, we had landed a pretty good project, and I said, I can't go. But my grandfather encouraged me to go. He said, hey, why don't you talk with the project manager, see if you can push the project off till you get back. He said, I think you should go on this trip. And so I did. Everything worked out when I go on this trip. And that just changed my perspective drastically, just on life in general, because I was pretty head down, work. And that just flipped my life 180. I just saw people that should not have hope, had hope. Who should not have joy, had joy, and more than I ever had. And here I am, blessed with everything, and I have my ideal life planned out ahead of me. I used to write things down on paper, what I want, make lists, and like I would just achieve after one after another. It's like, I want that. All right, I get that. I want that. I want to get that. It never ended. And here I go down there. There's people who have nothing, and there's just so much joy in their life. And so I came back from that and was like, I want to do more of that. And so I went down to Guatemala some more, and I started going through this period of mission work. And I just told guys, I said, well, I just won't say no. If somebody asks me to go, I'll go. And that's where Nicaragua came in, and that's my introduction to Holmes County. And so through this period, I was helping one of our local churches fundraise for their mission trip coming up. And it was probably about a month, 2 weeks to a month before the trip, the youth leader came out, and I was helping them at a car wash. He just said, Nick, me and my wife have been praying, and I think you should go on this trip. I said, what do you mean? He said, we've been praying, and you're supposed to go with us on this trip. He said, so much so that you've helped us out. He said, I will buy your ticket, and you will go on this trip with us. You just cover the rest. I said, well, I can't turn that down. I told God I wouldn't turn it. So I said, okay, I'll go with you. Well, that's where I met Joe Heatwall and Old Herd Rodriguez and the Creating Hope team. That was the trip. That was the first trip Creating Hope had ever done to Nicaragua with a group. It was a group from Maryland. And we went down, and I just kind of hit it off with Joe and a couple of the guys and I don't know the timeline exactly, but shortly after that trip, Joe called me up and said, hey, we're taking more groups down there. Do you want to lead groups with me? He said, Old Hair's taking groups. He knows Spanish. He's from Costa Rica. He knows he can take them himself. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't speak Spanish or anything. And I said, yeah, I'll go with you.
Do you speak Spanish?
No.
Okay.
No.
Maybe
But two people that don't speak Spanish make each other feel better. Yeah.
That doesn't strike me that would have been a deal breaker for Nick.
Right.
And so it basically, that's my introduction to Holmes County, and I started going down and taking groups from this area, meeting them in the airport either in Miami or Houston or Pittsburgh, fly down with them, and experience these life-changing events for weeks at a time, or a week or 10 days, and then they'd go home and I'd go back to Maryland. But through that is actually where I met my wife, but it's also where I got to meet a lot of people from Holmes County, and I began to form a name. And I'd come into Holmes County to go to these church events or whatever you have, and they'd be like, you're Nick. Like, you went to Nicaragua with my brother or my sister or my cousin or my nephew or whatever it is. And I'm like, yes, I am. Hi. And I'm the guy that came in and got a whole Mennonite church to do the Tootsie Wootsie. And it's like,
that sounds like a whole story.
Yeah. And so it was just kind of the period of my life. And that helped me see what Holmes County was, but also know a little bit about it before we end up moving out. And when we moved out, I looked at it this way. I said, business is business. I made this in my mind. I was like, okay, I only marry one person. I can start whatever business I want. So business is business. I can do that anywhere. And so that was a deciding factor on moving. It was like, well, that's not that big a deal. I can start another business. I've started 3 or 4 or 5, whether they're good or not, that's another thing. But I can start another one. I know how to do that. And also I knew the area pretty good, or at least knew enough contacts and enough people that where I felt comfortable. And my personality is completely different than my wife's, where I can plop in and know a lot of people. And I was like, I can make more friends. I can make new people. I can make acquaintances, whatever it is. And so yeah, coming into the area was pretty fun. Definitely nerve-wracking at first when you go from a place. That's probably what I missed the most the first couple of years was everybody knew me where I was from, and I knew everybody.
Sure.
I grew up on 2 different sides of the railroad track, essentially. I went to a private Mennonite and conservative school, grew up on the other side of the tracks where I didn't grow up that way. And so I got to experience multiple cultures growing up and plug in different places. So, with my family name, my grandfather, my parents, whatever, I was well known in this area. And then going to school and knowing friends and my brothers, I was well known in this area. So kind of knew everybody, or everybody knew me at least. And so it just made it interesting. And that was probably what I missed the most the first couple was like, I just don't know anybody. what. But that changed pretty quickly, and I know a good many people where I guess as Ken says, like just say the word Nick, and a lot of people know it, I guess.
Absolutely.
Whether good or bad, I don't know.
Oh, I think it's good. Absolutely.
Definitely. The thing is, Nick, I remember I met you, I think it was 2018, something like that.
Probably, yeah.
It was you'd been here a bit, and I got told I needed to meet you and talk to you, and it was awesome. We hit it off real well over at the cafe, drinking a little bit of coffee, eating some food, and talking business. But your journey here was one of building. You didn't come and start a business right away.
No.
And so that's a little bit of a different trajectory from previously. So talk about that a little bit, kind of stepping into something and building from there.
Yeah, so stepping into something was definitely way different. Business is business, and it has to do a lot with people. And it's either figuring out what product the people want and you sell it to them, and then dealing with the people that make it or make it happen. Okay, how do you satisfy them, or how do you deal with that culture? And so I took that mindset coming in, but it was definitely very different coming into an existing company than starting from scratch. And I found I definitely enjoy the startup way more. It's a lot more nimble. It's a lot more chaotic. It's a little scrappier. Where in coming into existing, you have to be a lot more meticulous about what your moves are. And you have to think a little more long-term on your results. And so coming into it was very different coming into an existing company, because there's a lot of old baggage, or not necessarily baggage, but just culture that's already there. This is the way we did it. This is how we used to do it. This is the expectations from customers already established. And you have to figure out how to work within those, but then also in some cases change those. And so for me, the biggest thing was probably culture to change that when I first came. Is going from a small 6 to 10 man company into a larger 40 person company, and trying to switch that culture around. And I remember that's when I was probably seeking a lot of advice, and anybody that said, hey, you should talk to this person, I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down and talk, and I'm reading all kinds of culture books and watching, everything that you can possibly think of to try and figure out, well, how do I turn this around? How do I make this work? And because when you're small, like I always was before, is you can create the culture just with you.
Right.
You don't have to. Everybody knows you. They know what's expected of you. They know what's expected of them. They know how you're going to react. But when you start adding layers, that's when you have to breathe that into the people underneath you. And you have to start at the bottom as well as just the top. And you can't be everywhere at all the time, and you don't know everything. And so one of the first things I did when I came into that company was I literally sat down with every single employee and met with them. And I said, all right, what's going wrong? And how can I help? And that was probably the one thing I did that just changed everything. I look back, we've done a lot of things, and we've tried this, tried that, but that one moment, taking that time, hearing them out, and solving small issues. It wasn't like, well, yeah, it could be nice if we had a new $300,000 router. It was, we need another set of pallet extension forks. I've been asking for a while. Nobody's gotten them. And I was like, okay, thanks for the meeting. I'm going to go get them. And you leave from the meeting, and you go get those $100 extension forks, and you bring them down, and that solved their problem. That was their world. You go to their level. And so in doing that, that just changed, one, I think, how the people looked at me, but it helped me understand what we're up against and the culture we're up against. And that was, if I'd suggest anybody, it's like understand your people and how are they affected in their day-to-day life, and what can you do to impact that. Because I look back at that moment, that was probably the one thing that I know I did right.
Yeah. And just for the people listening, just to give context to what you're saying, and I can say this because I worked at Canal Dover through high school before you got there, but it's a legacy business. The employees that you inherited, some of them have worked there for 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, I think our longest tenured is 28 years.
28 years. So
Been there.
that's a long time of culture. They've seen stuff. They've been there,
Yeah, they've
Almost
seen change.
longer
They've
than
seen
even-
consultants.
right.
They've seen everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like, what are you going to do different?
Exactly.
And to try and break through that, and like, yes, this is different. Yes, we're going to hear you out, or we're going to change that. So I spent the first 3 years there. I was not worried a whole lot on sales. I was just worried about retaining employees and keeping employees, and how do we make that happen, and who do we want to keep here, who do we not want to keep here, who do we have to get rid of, who do we want to stay. And so I spent the first couple of years just culture building, and that takes a lot to get that momentum going and the change, and then now we're in the sustaining side. It's like now we have to put processes in place to do that, and not lose that now. And as you're going through turnover, adding employees or growing, it's okay. How do you get the right people in here?
Do you find that satisfying? Do you find, you said you love the chaos, you love the agility, you love the start, and we're going to get to another start here in a few minutes. But do you find it meaningful, the institutionalized nature of an existing entity, building that? Do you find that to be satisfying?
I've struggled with that one. I do. I took it as a challenge. It was a fun challenge to turn that around. And yes, I found energy in that and getting it turned around. But I've definitely recognized too that that's not my sweet spot, is that. And so that's where bringing in my different partners when we bought the company and bringing in different people is like, okay, I need people that are going to sustain it, and they're going to do the day-to-day, and they're going to put the processes in place, because that's not my strong suit at all.
Ken, I jumped all over you before.
Oh,
you
you're
say something.
good. Did you struggle with having the same sense of ownership that you did with when you started with something?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is yes. I do really well when it's all of mine on the line. I struggle to make decisions when somebody else's money's on the line, and when somebody else's ownership or name's on the line. Like, I have no problem making decisions and taking responsibility of things. Like, I will take that all day long. That's what I thrive at. But knowing that it's somebody else's and that I'm liable for that, I struggled with that. And I don't think I realized it until we did buy the company how much it affected me. And I also, in that time, took me back to when me and my grandfather were 50-50 partners in that company. And when he passed away, it was all back on me. And I realized then again, wow, I was making decisions differently. It wasn't instinct necessarily. It was very thought out, and we had to go through this process, and he even gave me a lot of freedom. And even my father-in-law on the Canal oversight, he gave me a ton of freedom. There's nothing against them. It was just personally, I've just struggled doing that, working for somebody else, or having, and so having that freedom, it makes my decisions sharper and faster. And because I use a lot of data to back up decisions, but I will ultimately make a decision based on what I think is right. If the data says wrong, and I'm like, you know what, I know that's not exactly right, but I think we can make it work.
Sure.
And we won't know till we get into it. And so, both my grandfather and my father-in-law, they're both numbers driven people. And so the numbers make sense. And so that makes sense, and to do it that way. And I've just, I didn't realize in the time how much I struggled with that, but I did. And it was just an interesting discovery about myself, I think.
Well, let's shift gears for a second and get into scratching an itch, because just a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
2 years ago, you decided to get into a low-cost field with very low risk and almost, equipment that you can pick up on the side of the road.
Exactly.
Seriously, you got into asphalt.
Yeah.
You got into asphalt with no previous experience, which seems to be a common theme here that we're seeing.
It's very much, yeah.
But
I'm
tell us about that, because you're still doing Canal Dover.
Yep.
Still president of Canal Dover, but also now president of Kingsway Paving.
Yep.
So talk about that.
Yeah, and we the two partners I work with, they both moved from Maryland as well. We bought Canal over a year and a half ago now. Same year we started Kingsway. So busy year. Everybody else was worried about the pandemic, and we were starting
Just
business.
buying up businesses.
It's like, all right, everybody's home. Let's get some work done. So we started that company. It would have been, our first job would have been May 2 years ago. So we're just now into our third season. And so getting into that, there's definitely a theme here, Chris, where I normally have no idea what I'm doing when I jump into something. I enjoy research, and I enjoy learning. And, I'm an active learner, so just reading about it's not going to work. I got to experience it. And so if you tell me that's not going to work, dang it, I probably will still try it.
Yeah.
It's cost me a lot of money in my life, but hey, that's just how I learn. Harvard would have been cheap is my line. Like I've made mistakes that cost me a Harvard education in a matter of months, And but yeah, back to that question of starting and satisfying that itch. So we started Kingsway. It probably started about a year before we actually started paving. Ever since I moved in the area, everybody was like, hey, we need another provider for this. We need another provider for this. The industry's, there's not enough people satisfying this. People are tired of waiting a year to get their driveway paved and this and that. And I would have went to church with Paul Troyer. Everybody knows him as Paver Paul. And since I'd moved out, Paul had quit his previous job, and he has about 40 years of experience. Not 40. Yeah, 40. Sorry, Paul. 40 years experience on a paver.
Yeah.
And so I sat down with Paul and I said, hey, I want to start this up. Do you want to be a part of it and help us get going? And he thought about it for a little while, and he said, yep, let's do it. So I went in on a Thanksgiving about 3 years ago and went out to dinner with three of my best friends. And they all lived in Maryland, and we went out to B-dubs, or BW3s as everybody from Ohio calls it.
We're not cool like you Maryland people.
And we went out, we sat down, and I pulled out notes. And Darren, he's one of our partner friends, and he said, when Nick brings out notes, something serious is going down. And so I laid out this plan, and I just said, hey, we got the furniture business. We can buy that, get that going. And at the time, Darren was working for one of our customers, managing the store, so had some experience in that field. And Sam, who worked for me before for 3 or 4 years, on the tri-state side, he was there. And then Jared, who's runs the Kingsway side there, he's got 15 years experience in construction and concrete. And we sat down and said, here, this is the vision. This is what I'm doing. Do you want to be involved? Do you want to come along? And I know that includes you guys moving out to Ohio, which, because we always talk about being in business together. And whenever I moved, it was like, well, there goes that dream.
Sure.
And turns out, no, it just looks different. And so anyhow, surprisingly, the two of them said yes. And so Darren came out first, and he started transitioning on the Canal over side so I could be freed up to start. The Kingsway side, Jared, he started coming back and forth and working on the Kingsway side, and we just said we're going to start it and go and see what happens. And it's interesting because we started trying to get money. We knew what we needed to get going because it's a pretty capital intensive
Those machines aren't cheap.
No, it costs a little bit of money to get going.
They don't have those down at Tractor Supply.
No, it's not just a MacBook and you go. It's pretty expensive, and there's probably a reason nobody else has done it yet in Holmes County. For that very reason, nobody knew what they were doing, and it's pretty capital intensive. But we tried to find some seed money different places, and they just kind of kept falling through. And finally, we were like, you know what, we're just going to try and make it work with what we have. So I put some money in, Jared put some money in, and just a lot of sweat equity. And one of my passions is just equipment. Ever since I've been little, I love equipment, heavy equipment, construction, whatever it is. I've been on a tractor since I was 6 type thing. And I also like buying equipment and auctions and this and that. And so, and even while I was out here, ever since I moved, I would buy and sell and flip equipment. And so I'd buy a drill and sell it, try and make some money. And so I used that skill, and we pieced together enough riggedy equipment to get going. And pretty much all of it came from an auction of some sort.
That's awesome.
And then spent a couple months in the spring just putting it together, painting it, wiring it, getting it going. We bought an old paver out of Pennsylvania, took it up to Mount Hope Tractor, put way too much money into it, and they got it going for us. And I still remember this is probably April at this point, and we're going out with the paver, and me and Jared go up with Paul. We're the only two in the company right now. Paul's coming on board at some point. He's helping us figure out what we need. That and YouTube and Instagram, you can learn anything off of those. And so we go up to run this paver for the first time, and me and Jared realized at that point we actually have no idea how a paver works.
It's a good time. It's a good time to think about it.
Yeah, we do now, people. We do now. But and we're trying to pave this millings out just to test the machine out, and we're like waiting on Paul to Paul, you got to raise your end up, and he's driving the paver, and we're just like, this looks like horrible. He's like, well, you have to adjust it. I'm like, oh, well, we thought you were doing that. So anyhow. Again, another common theme, like Nick has no idea what he's doing. He's like, you are right, I don't. And so we get going and start advertising, trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to charge? Here's our first goal was like, all right, $4,000 a day. All right, that's one small job a day. We can do that. And I mean, we just hit it hard with the marketing. Spent probably way too much for the first year in business, but I mean, we were on billboards, we were in the newspaper, we were on Instagram.
Your Instagram, Facebook guys were everywhere.
Oh, they were
everywhere.
I was hounding everybody at 1 o'clock at night playing Candy Crush, and Kingsway pops up. And and yard signs, we were just putting them in random yards, and guerrilla warfare. And we started getting jobs. And I think we had like 50,000 lined up, and then the pandemic hit. And everybody started calling us like, yeah, we're going to put this on hold. We're going to put this on hold. Me and Jared looked at each other like, well, we just spent all of our money, and now everybody's canceling jobs. And we said, well, let's just keep going. People are they're going to calm down. And sure enough, we hired a couple people. Again, had no idea what they were doing. None of them had paved before. And none of them enrolled before. They were like, Regan, who works for us still, he was just out of high school, never even run a piece of equipment hardly. And we're like, Regan, you're going to be our roller operator. It's like, hey, I don't even know how to make it go forward and backwards. It's like, don't worry, we'll figure it out. And so our first job, and bless their hearts, they had no idea what they were getting themselves in for, but it included some concrete. So, hey, we got that covered. Jared knows how to do that. And some paving. And we knew we were on to something because they're like, you're the only person that ever called us back. We've been trying to get this done for 2 years, and nobody's called us back. And I said, all right, Jared, all we have to do is show up, and we'll be ahead of everybody else. And so our first job, it should have taken us like 3 hours, and we were there for 12. And it was just like, but when we left, it was like, that doesn't look that great. But the customer was very happy with it. And we're like, okay, we're going to have to get better at this. And so we slowly got better and better. And within 3 weeks, we had made the decision. We bought a new paver, a new skid steer with a miller, and we just went on a tear and just started adding equipment to support the team and started adding crew members and team members. And I think within 3 months, we had multiple other people from Maryland that had moved out to work with us. And yeah, so first year we hit our goal that we set, and I thought there's no way we're going to hit that, but somehow we hit it. We exceeded a little bit. Second year we tripled that, and then this year we're trying to double what we tripled.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, and we have 27 months worth of experience. So
that's awesome. So obviously you're in the chaos, and that's where you said you thrive. And Canal Dover is now going under the culture you've kind of designed for it. What's next? Do we get to know?
Well, here, maybe based on what I know, what are you reading about that's interesting that you know nothing about? That's the next business, probably.
So what's next is probably just trying to get a hold of what we already have. Well, okay, I say that, but we're working on something potentially now. But I'll leave that alone. But I mean, to start this year off, we kind of sat down and said, here's what we want to do this year on the paving side, and I think we can max out our crew with this. And then somebody approached us at the beginning of the year and said, hey, you want to buy a crusher? I was like, what's a crusher? And he's like, well, I got this work for recycling concrete and going out on site where there's demolitions and things like that. And I want somebody to partner with me in it. And so we sat down and met, and we ended up, out of that meeting, we ended up buying all of his equipment and going and hiring him to go out and find piles to crush. And we started crushing concrete, recycled concrete. And that has been very interesting. And again, I have no idea what we're doing.
I was going to ask, what's your prior experience on this?
YouTube. And so yeah, we kind of, that fell in our laps, and so we're trying to just wrestle that right now. Wrestle, wow, that was very redneck. We're trying to wrestle that right now and get a grip on what that is, what that entails. And it started off was, all right, we're going to go out and do these 1 or 2 day jobs and just charge by the day. And our equipment supplier, he's about pulling his hair out. And so we were just renting a small crusher, and the first month, it's like, yeah, that's not what we want to do. Like, and we go out and we find like these 20 and 15 and 30,000 ton piles. And it's like, well, you're going to need a bigger crusher. It's like, okay, well, what's the smallest we can start off with? And it's like, well, that's not big enough because we're not getting our production we need. And okay, well, let's go to a bigger one. So this week we're the second weekend with a bigger one, and we're going to run that for a couple weeks, and then we have another bigger one coming that we're going to try that one out. And so it's escalating quickly. And but I mean, oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I truly enjoy that. And anyway, I go through days and slumps just like everybody else, where I'm just like, what in the world did I get myself into? What am I going to do tomorrow? How are we going to make this work? How are we going to survive sometimes? And, whenever you're in growth mode or changing things up all the time, it really comes down. It's like, whoa, some days it's like, well, how are we going to survive? But that's just where I enjoy, and I just love that. And I've said multiple times the last couple of years, like, I am where I need to be, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And what I really enjoy about the Kingsway side is that's in the blue collar world. Like, that's in a world that's been forgotten for a long time. Those culture changes and that culture that I created originally at Tri-State, and now I'm trying to create at Canal Dover, and trying to do the same thing with the paving side. I mean, that's where I just love that, to hear from our team and say, hey, I've never worked at a place like this. You can't replace that.
Yeah.
To have people that are in their 50s and 60s working for you, like, I've worked a lot of places, and this is the first place I feel like, it's okay. I enjoy what I'm doing. It's like, that's a long time to live life and not really enjoy your work, or to not feel appreciated at work.
Yeah.
And so, with Kingsway, it's our mission's changed and our purposes kind of keep changing. We're still trying to nail those down, but it keeps coming back to, we build people. That's when it's like, we're not just building driveways, and we're not just building the company here. We're building people, and we're going to try and change our world.
I love it.
Around us. And so we've partnered with Brantberry to try and tell some of those stories. And we got some videos that we're releasing over, and it's just hearing from our team. And I mean, to hear from them when I'm not there and they're just asking questions, and to hear just their enthusiasm around it, and hear them say, yeah, I've never worked at a place like this, I love it, or the culture's great from the top down, and they hear us, they understand us, they care about us. And that's where it all comes down, because I believe I was put in this world for a reason, and business is a part of that. And in my several years of doing mission work and traveling all over the world and almost getting out of business, me and God had some rounds there, and he ended up giving me back what I had given back to him, and solidified the fact that I was put in this world to do business, but to do it differently. And so trying to take that mindset and not saying, well, missionaries aren't on a pedestal and pastors aren't on a pedestal and this and that. They're very valuable to the body of Christ, but so are all of us. So is the business owner. We have right now a little over 70 people working with us between both companies. And if I take those 70 people and I can influence their life for 40 to 50 hours a week, and I influence the culture that they live in, the environment that they live in, I can do a lot of work and good within the community and within their lives. When you take a pastor and they get to influence them, 3 hours a week? And so if you take that mindset into it, it's like we're doing something bigger than just trying to make money or build a company. We're trying to build people, and we're trying to change our world around us. And I always tell our people, hey, you have a sphere of influence. Every single one of us does, whether it's your brother or sister, your wife, your parents, your friends. Influence that. Change that. Start there. And I've just been given the opportunities. I have a big sphere of influence. And how can I change that? And how can I impact that? And how can I do it in a kingdom fashion, in a kingdom way? And I always tell our people, so much of the old mentality was, hey, you work for me and I'm going to try and prevent you from working anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
We're going through the Great Recession right now, or the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
Might be going through the Great Recession too. But
Not yet.
yeah, but the Great Resignation, and I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. Does it stink? Yes. It's very hard to find good people and to train them and to pour into them. And it costs a lot of money to train people. But I always tell our people, and I mean it, is if I'm just a stepping stone, or our companies are a stepping stone to you where you ultimately end up and you find your purpose, then I'm okay with that. If you're here for 3 months and you leave this place and it's like, wow, I don't ever want to do that work, mm-hmm. but I found something I want to do, great. That's perfect. If you find your home here and you want to spend the rest of your life here working here, I'm good with that too. And but ultimately, we want you to find your purpose, just like I was able to find mine, and I'm sure it'll change throughout my life. But if we can help you find your purpose and help you make an impact in your life and for your family and provide for your family at the same time, and go home and enjoy your life, then we're winning. And it's fun to make money, but that's not the ultimate thing. If you can have fun when the times are tough, you can have a lot of fun when the times are good. Yeah. It's not going to make you a bad person making a lot of money or having a big business. It's just going to amplify whoever you were at the beginning. And I think that's what I'm finding in my life. As long as I stay grounded and centered and know who I am and what I'm doing it for, it's just amplifying the reach that I have, in a good way.
Yeah. Well, that's a heck of a place to pull the chute on this one. But Nick, your story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, no problem.
I think there's so much there that about just go and find your way. I love it. Your heart for your people, your heart for what you're trying to do, and your vision for what you can do for the world is just amazing. Thanks for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, no problem. And if I can be an encouragement to anybody and just listen and say, hey, don't stop.
Yeah.
Don't give up. When you come to a fork in the road, just take it. Like, don't get stuck thinking. Sometimes it's good to think, but a lot of times it's better to act.
Yeah.
If I knew everything that I would going to have to go through to get to this point, I probably never would have started. And, we say that all the time. It's like, man, if we only knew. Yeah, if we only knew, we wouldn't have started. And sometimes the best thing is just jump in and start.
Yeah.
And, if you're stuck, if you're out there feeling like you're the only one that's struggling, you're not. I've never met a business person or somebody that owned a business or somebody that was pursuing a dream and said, whew, that was smooth sailing. never struggle there. I mean, you guys are lawyers, you know. You guys know people have problems, and so yeah, don't ever feel isolated in it. And I think that's probably one of the things. Like I do that probably more than anything. A lot of times, like you just feel like your problems are only your problems and nobody else's. And it's just not that case.
Yeah.
And so just keep moving, don't stop.
Dude, you're awesome. Thank you. You're
very
so
welcome.
much.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, you can search for Kingsway. You can search for Canal Dover, and you can see more about what Nick is doing.
We're hiring on all fronts.
And they're hiring on all fronts. If you're looking for a great place to work. But you can follow up and see what Nick and his team are doing and pay attention to maybe what's next.
That's right.
On their journey.
That's right. We don't know. It literally is changing so fast. Like we're making plans and then it's like, oh, that's a cool opportunity.
But maybe not seafood.
Probably not seafood. I'm going to try and stay away from seafood. So I learned one thing. That's not for me. So.
Well, on behalf of Jordan and Ken, this is Chris White. Thanks for listening.